Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Rehash, a Web3 podcast. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and today we're speaking with Nick Naraghi, co-founder and CEO of Hats Protocol, about DAOs, AI, and how his thinking around both have developed since we last heard from him on Season 3, Episode 6 of Rehash from October 2022. One of my favorite things about bringing back past guests is having the opportunity to follow up with some of the things that they said previously and see how their thinking has changed as the crypto space has also changed and grown over time. There were definitely some things we talked about in our October 2022 episode that are easy to laugh at today, but much of what we talked about is actually still pretty relevant. Nick starts by sharing his thoughts on how AI will impact DAOs and other organizations beyond merely reducing costs, what a world in which everyone has their own AI agent would look like, and how the widespread implementation of AI can completely alter the way society operates. Nick also shares some of his biggest learnings from building Hats Protocol over the last few years and what their newest product, Hats Pro, is all about. And finally, we wrap up with some philosophical and fun questions from our community on the human to AI relationship. I would love to hear what you think about some of the questions we discussed in this episode, so please hop into our Telegram group at t.me/rehashweb3 and share your thoughts with myself and the rest of the Rehash community there. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, learn something new, and leave with something interesting to think about. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Nick. Nick Naraghi, welcome back to Rehash. It has been 2.5 years since your last solo appearance on Rehash, which is crazy to think about. And I also recently had another conversation with Spencer from your team, your co-founder, Spencer Graham. And it's been over 3 years since he's been on the podcast, but it just doesn't feel that way with you guys because we did that Hats mini-series collaboration and we talk all the time. So it certainly doesn't feel like it's been 2.5, 3 years, but it really has been that long. And I just went back and re-listened to our previous conversation. There are definitely some funny parts in there that just sound so outdated to us today. But obviously, we're top of mind and super relevant 3 years ago, but the space just moves so fast that so much has changed. So anyway, welcome back to Rehash.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. That last episode was really helpful for me to see where my thinking was. And I think it's best encapsulation of it at the time. And you always pull really clear ways of saying things out of me. So I'm really excited to be here today.
Amazing. So the last time you were on was all the way back in Season 3, Episode 6 from October 2022. And I think I forced a prediction out of you in that episode, which was I asked you, we were talking about, the flippening happening with DAOs and companies where DAOs will actually become more prevalent than companies. And I think the prediction I forced out of you was I said, tell me when this is going to happen, when this DAO to company flippening is going to happen. And you said 2034.
Okay. Not too bad.
So not too bad. I think at the time I was like, oh, wow, surprised you didn't say something more recent given just how your general optimism and, about the space. But do you still stand by that timeline today?
I would actually bring it up closer. So I think the exponential curve of coordination cost reduction is probably something we return to a lot today. It's been actually working quite well. So the DAO world is sort of struggling because there's certain pathways that DAOs have tended to take. But the vision of DAOs, the design space of DAOs, a net new, intelligent, programmable company that has widely distributed ownership and heavy amounts of programmable automation, especially with the AI stuff that's happening today. It feels like it's moving very quickly. So I imagine multi-agent organizations living inside decentralized, tokenized structures to overtake companies in less than 5 years.
Yeah, I'm also curious to hear if you're changing or if your thinking has changed since our last episode about, when you talk about DAOs that are 100 times better than companies, which aspects are you talking about specifically that make DAOs 100 times better than companies?
Yeah, the vector that I primarily think about is in terms of coordination costs and effectiveness, right? So ROI, how much value can we create? When we come together, we form a group because we think we can do better as a group than as individuals. When we do that, how much more value can we create relative to the costs of coordinating, which is very expensive. And I think AI tools are really bringing that coordination cost down. DAOs and DAO tools brought a very narrow aspect of that coordination cost down, which is roughly like running shareholder meetings, which is pretty weird because that's like not at all the most important part of running a company. But I think that agentic AI being built into every different application that these new types of businesses are using is going to significantly bring this coordination costs down. Of course, that's like a top line thing that's easy to talk about with investors and operators. The other side of the equation for me is personal fulfillment and enjoyment. As a human being, I want to feel connected to the people I work with. I want to feel fulfilled by the work that I'm doing. I want to feel happy. I think that that's another thing that, in the future of work aspect of DAOs that we could potentially go, maybe not 100x, but at least 10x on in terms of like people's alignment with their mission and purpose and their skill sets, like the ikigai of work.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear more about that component in particular, because I think in our last conversation, we talked a little bit about AI and agents automating things more so that we can operate more efficiently and bring down costs. But when you're talking about reducing coordination costs, there's also this question of how does AI improve coordination, human coordination? And I think that's the part that I find to be fascinating because it feels like when we talk about human coordination, the human part of it is a big part of it. And that's the part that I'm curious if you think AI agents can really replicate to the same level that humans can actually perform these duties.
Yeah, it's interesting because the last startup I was working on in Silicon Valley before I got into DAOs full time was we were building intelligent agent. We were called intelligent agents that would sort of know everything that was in a given knowledge worker's head and their objectives as part of their like role and their objectives as part of their personal career path. And then everyone in the organization would have one of those agents. And then there was a system that allowed the agents to sort of communicate with one another on behalf of the individuals. And the idea was that you could have many more interactions at a much lower cost than like having individual people messaging each other on Slack to try to figure out, who's who and who runs what and who's the DRI of this project and what are the politics behind that person and their boss so that I actually know who the right person to talk to is, and all the tough, gooey parts of running a human organization. And I still think that that's directionally correct. The technology today is sort of like ready to build those types of things. Obviously, it has, we think a lot about like access control as a enabling technology for that. So who and which agents should have access to which permissions and pieces of knowledge and data in order to like maintain privacy within the organization in the right places. But I feel like the state of the foundation models and then the sort of feature frameworks on top of that are ready to build those new types of business applications that we always dreamt could be possible. And not only is that going to increase like efficiency, like, okay, I'm going to report across all of our products, application layer, all of our usage so that I can better understand like which features to build next. Like who do I need to talk to understand like which analytics are where and who's responsible for building the features that already exist in the app. And agents should sort of be able to pull all that stuff really quickly and even surface things that maybe as a human I wouldn't have found on my own. I think that's even more applicable on a decentralized networks, like combing through a Discord to find those insights is actually much harder than coming through a Slack and a Notion. I think overall, like you would be able to get those insights much more efficiently than the sort of manual processes that exist today.
How do you think that'll affect company dynamics? Sure, there's a lot of politics within larger organizations that is not always super fun. And they're just office politics that people have, come to accept as a part of life and something they have to deal with. But there's also a lot of good that comes out of office dynamics and relationships with your coworkers and things like that. And I wonder if by minimizing some of that and reducing it in the name of efficiency and reducing costs, that we're also taking away some of the good parts of those human to human relationship building that are kind of enjoyable parts of working in an organization. Do you think that that's a concern that you have, or are you speaking specifically with regards to human coordination in purely a work setting and purely an efficiency setting, and leaving room still for all the social aspects that still exist?
This is a super interesting question because I think, AI generally is replacing like the logical aspects of the thinking mind as human. So like assuming that trends toward zero required from humans in getting work done. Then what are humans left to do?
Right.
How do humans make money? Like these are questions that are sort of becoming more popular. I learned so much from Dan Hunt about the investigation of that side of the question, and a lot from David Ehrlichman as well, because thinking about the networks of people, how do you build the bonds and what types of things emerge from a coordinated group of folks that are shared values and aligned and headed in the same direction. Dan sort of looks at this as like an individual developmental process where a person is sort of going through their life journey and creating a system of things that work for them. And as parts of that system get automated, there's room for other parts to come in. And someone can become more and more themselves and more aligned with their personal mission and purpose and the things that they care about. They actually develop their values to be more complex and more integrated. And of course, the organization itself goes through a journey that parallels the individual journey and is a conglomerate of all of the individuals who are participating in that organization. So I think that we'll spend more time on our social dynamics, and we'll find those social dynamics less political and more fulfilling, and more, we'll more easily find alignment with the organizations that we want to spend time with. And the groups of people that we work with will tend to be more aligned with one another, which will also improve the experience.
Yeah. While we're on the topic of just kind of common questions and skepticisms that come up with AI that are becoming more popular, another thing that people love to talk about is, well, is AI going to take away our jobs, right? And it sounds like with a lot of the automating of processes and things like that, does that, in your view, does that sort of take away some of the jobs that exist today? And where does that leave people to, have work to do and to be able to earn money?
I would say 99.9% yes, most work, it will be automated. A lot of the VC funding rounds recently, especially outside of Web3 crypto space, are for agentic software, vertical agents that are automating salespeople's jobs and nursing jobs and developer jobs. And, right now there's some arguments about, well, those guys that put out Devin as a software developer, it's not actually able to do a full software developer's job. But then you have Cursor raising into 10 billion valuation and saying, okay, well, actually, the 10x engineer or the 100x engineer comes from the, what many years ago was called the Centaur model, the human plus AI combined that is able to be more effective than just the human. They actually did a chess competition back when Deep Blue and the first AI model that beat Garry Kasparov, and big deal in the 80s, I think. Sort of all these different configurations of was chess dead? Is it solved? Are only people going to, AI is always going to be chess players? How has evolved the meta? And I think it's a fun arc to sort of look at. But the interesting insight from there is that, humans and groups of humans and individual AIs and groups of AIs were all outcompeted by AIs and humans working together to come up with the best chess moves. So I think we'll see a lot of that. But I also think that the agent frameworks and the models have gotten so good that most work will be automated. And the nature of a lot of the work that exists today are bullshit jobs, where you're people are taking a piece of paper and putting it somewhere else, where you have one dynamic that sort of spins out of that is the software engineer on Reddit who's trying to, retire early, who has 3 jobs and works them all remotely and doesn't tell them, and sort of just ignore the morality of that for a second. And you have a lot of people the quiet quitting dynamics, a lot of work that really doesn't need a full person or a full salary is just getting reduced into these agents. And you have one person who operates 10 or 100 agents, and they can do now the work of 100 people. And those agents scale infinitely, just like Kubernetes clusters or AWS instances. And they charge on the agent framework company. The reason that VCs want to invest in that market is because you're arbitraging salaries. So you go into, you tell this company, hey, you've got 100 salespeople right now, you pay them each $150K a year. Just instead of that, you should only have 10 salespeople. And then for each of the other 90, instead of $150K a year, we'll just charge you $15K a year. We'll charge you, $1K a month or $2K a month for that. So you think of it as a massive cost reduction. And yeah, of course, people are going to lose their jobs when those types of cost reductions are now possible.
Yeah, that's scary to think about in a world where it's hard to imagine making money without working. Obviously there's the rhetoric of well, how great would that be if we could just reduce the amount of time that we need to work and actually have more time to live life and do the things that we love to do. And yeah, that sounds great, but it's hard to imagine how that can play out in reality, especially with some of the more, I guess, like lower level or blue collar jobs that will get replaced by AI. It's going to be even harder for that demographic of people, I think, to find replacement work when, all of the things that they can do sort of like as a trade that they've known for generations or without a college degree will like really get replaced and taken away.
Yeah, it's super scary to think about. And, I sort of got turned on to AGI when I was 17. And then some years later, turned on to UBI. So sort of, okay, if you're following the trend line of like, Ray Kurzweil saying, look, like if you look at the way that compute accelerates with Moore's law, and you look at the way that data storage is increasing, you look, et cetera, internet throughput of bandwidth and stuff like that. All those things just keep going. And at some point, they're all going to add up to infinite scalable intelligence, this global scale. And it turns out it's mostly true. Like we're living in a moment where like that was predicted 20 years ago and it's sort of happening. So there are some people who were thinking about these trends back then and said, okay, well, no one's gonna have to work anymore. What are we gonna do? Oh, we need UBI. So maybe 2012, 2013, I got turned on to that. And I was like, this sounds great. You sort of go down these rabbit holes of like the different flavors and the different political resistances to these types of things. And my synthesis over the last 10 years has basically been that we will move into a post-scarcity economy. So we have actually sufficient resources on Earth for every human being to get their needs met and live a very significantly improved quality of life. We actually have the distribution through our global supply chains to get those resources to all the right places. The missing piece is the economics. So what brought me into crypto and what still interests me about it is that the AGI necessitates a evolution of our economic system as humanity for this next era of, the next chapter of our civilization and our species. How does one approach creating that? And saying we need UBI so that people can get their needs met or even thrive beyond the average quality of life that we've had so far is nice. But like what leverage points do you start sort of bouncing up and down on in order to affect the global systems of economics that we have in place? And I think that writing smart contracts on a credibly neutral platform that can create incentives and economics to help reorient the system or create something better is a really interesting place to try to apply leverage.
Yeah. Absolutely. That ties in nicely too with just understanding that background where you come from and now knowing how invested you are and you have been in the DAO space for so long. I think that makes a lot of sense too, because I think DAOs have a lot of potential to figure these things out in a democratic way that, again, resist capture. Like we've talked to Spencer about his anti-capture framework, and it's come to be even more relevant and important, at least it feels that way today than, whenever he wrote that article a few years ago. But speaking of these tools and, blockchain being a really good tool to enable, AI for human coordination and things like this, what are some of the best tools that you're seeing today when it comes to AI coordination and that like are being implemented in DAOs, or maybe not yet, but you think could be a really good fit for DAOs?
Yeah, I think there's sort of this barbell of DAOs right now, which is like the ones that survived, and a very large group of those DAOs are the ones that were able to accumulate capital via token launches or fundraising that would enable them to survive. And those are very mature organizations with sort of established processes, oftentimes like very specific regulatory strategies. And that cohort has generally not been super quick to adopt AI tools because they're like, enterprise now. They buy things slowly. They still have the sort of bureaucratic DAO stakeholder process. And I think that there's some aspect of stability in, okay, we've got a big protocol, we've got a big treasury, we need to sort of move gently and not make any, the main thing is to make sure that the protocol stays alive and well. On the other side, you have very small sort of new experiments, new projects that are trying to spin things up. And I think in general right now, those have been having a little bit of trouble accruing enough capital to run meaningful experiments and to sort of like get into the middle of the barbell of like okay, well, like let's do a fully AI run DAO. What does that look like? Okay, we just defer to the AI on everything, and then we vote on what the AI says, and we pick like small groups of people that have relevant expertise for like the smaller decisions that are recommended by AI. And it hasn't really been done yet. I think that like I really like what the Eliza team was working on in terms of like creating a plugin marketplace for AI. Obviously, that's shifted a lot really quickly with Anthropic releasing the Model Context Protocol MCP and OpenAI adopting that. So starting to see some shifting landscape of where power and value is accruing in the stack, with the model providers sort of like vertically integrating the agent frameworks directly. But I think, yeah, agent-based DAOs, still same thesis. Like, I believe that we're right at Hats about roles being the right way to construct organizations. I believe that roles being held by individuals or AI agents or groups of individuals is sort of like the right primitive to sort of construct things. Figuring out the right eligibility criteria in our language, or like job description requirements and like traditional criteria and like reputation systems that could quantify that for agents and for humans, is still a big missing piece of the puzzle. So I'm not seeing a lot of organizational AIs. I'm seeing a lot of market-based AIs, like Banker, for example, being on the timeline on Twitter and people using it for their own trades and being able to sort of like interact with it on a single player basis. But multiplayer agents that many people interact with and synthesize things on behalf of the group, I feel like there's a lot missing there right now.
Do you see us getting to a point where each individual has their own AI agent to act on their behalf? So within the context of a DAO, maybe I have my own AI agent that has been trained to know the way that I normally vote on proposals, to know what my values and my belief systems are. And that way, anytime a new proposal comes out, I don't need to, bother reading it. I can just send my AI agent out there to vote on proposals for me, to be active DAO members for me. Do you see us getting to a point where something like this plays out?
Definitely, especially as we participate in more DAOs. So with my thesis around how we create the new economy that sort of balances distributing abundance to everybody is that widely distributed ownership of everything that we use and participate in and create is the aligning force that actually makes DAOs very popular and solves this sort of, this key problem in capitalism where there's the principal agent problem, where like stakeholders on the investment side and the employer side taking advantage of stakeholders on the user side, right? Milwaukee had this great S-curve diagram in like one of the early like GTC launch blog posts that was like, the reason we launch tokens is because we can distribute ownership that aligns incentives between the users and the builders. And if we do that, then in the long term of the maturity of the platform, like Airbnb IPOing, then needing to figure out how to like get from VC subsidized market prices to like sustainable business, and then inevitably like max extract from the hosts and the guests on the platform. That won't happen because the hosts and the guests are also shareholders. They're also stakeholders, and they have ownership and they have say, and they can leave. And that aligning force is like the panacea for the sort of negative externalities we see across the board in capitalism. People sometimes call them all. So step one, sort of like tokenize everything and then widely distribute those tokenized forms of ownership to everyone who's using it. You see that with tipping. You see that with like points programs and airlines and coffee shops. I think those all turn into like the tokenized, ownership. And then, sorry, to come back to your question. Okay, now I'm in 3,000 DAOs because I'm in my HOA DAO and I'm in my like community street DAO and my park DAO and then coffee shop DAO and like, this webcam and camera DAO. Like, I only own like 0.00001% of that. So I don't really want to pay attention. But my AI agent at zero cost can just actively participate in all these things and vote my values. And if it ever comes to a point where I own 10% of something, or 1% of something, or this is a really, really important vote, then my agent should surface that to me and say, hey, of all the votes that are happening today, or all the decisions that you have say in, I know you only have 15 minutes to go over these. So I picked the top 7 here's all the context that you need to make the decision, and what should I say? And that not only makes sure that it's highly legitimate across all the stakeholders that are the most expert and the things that you personally most care about, but it also is going to significantly reduce the cost of participating in all of these DAOs.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if you've thought about some of the things that can go wrong with a model like that. So in the same way that there are human bad actors, I'm just thinking about a world where there are AI agent bad actors as well. And so, I've got my AI agent in all 3,000 of my DAOs actively voting on my behalf. It's been trained so well to know all my preferences, my values, my beliefs, everything. But then it interacts with this bad actor AI agent that somebody else spun up, a human bad actor spun up an AI agent version of them, and they're actually trying to impersonate Nick Naraghi. And so then Nick Naraghi bot interacts with Diana Chen bot, fake Nick Naraghi bot interacts with Diana Chen bot and is trying to convince me to do whatever crazy things, to vote against my core beliefs, or to buy a token that's a scam token, or to do something to do something harmful. At that point, how do I guess, protect my AI agent against these bad actors? Because in the real world, like with humans, if somebody comes to me with Telegram DM and it's like, hey, buy this. I mean, obviously, I know that's a scam. But if somebody were to message me that said, I am Nick Naraghi on Telegram, I would do a double take and I would think twice, and I would, maybe look through my contact list and identify, wait, no, this is like not the real person. Or I might go and message a mutual friend of ours, Spencer, and say, hey, is this real? Is this like really Nick, or is this somebody else? With AI agents, how will they, be able to prevent against bad actors and harmful behaviors without that sort of like social network that humans have?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the cool things about working on the cutting edge in this time is that a lot of times people are sort of like looking at AI as a magic wand that like automates everything, right? And you can sort of, because we're optimistic about it, you can sort of draw that line out as far as you want. And I think if you apply that in this direction, we're basically talking about like security concerns, right? So does my agent have access to a security MCP or, social verification MCP or compliance MCP that like lets my agent on my behalf verify all the people that I'm interacting with, gather like public data about them from their agents. And of course, with any security concern, there's always the cat and mouse game of, okay, the security protection tooling advances, and then the hacker tooling, attacker types of attacks that they use and the tools that they use to make them and spoof various accounts advances. So I think it's always going to be like that. But I sort of look at that as hopefully like a non-issue, like 10x or 100x more intelligent models that have access to security tooling should trivially be able to determine those types of attack vectors and make sure that I don't waste my time. Sort of like how the iPhone now has like silence unknown callers, and it's pretty good about making sure that like likely spam accounts don't actually even make my phone ring.
Working in Web3 for the past 5 years, I've seen firsthand how crucial reliable data is for everything we build. But getting accurate, transparent data on-chain has always been a challenge. That's why I'm excited about Teller. They're revolutionizing how we handle reference prices in crypto by taking a completely decentralized approach to data creation and validation. Teller is not just another Oracle. They built an entire architecture that leverages collective intelligence to ensure the data you're getting is accurate and censorship resistant. If you're building something that needs high quality data you can trust, you need to check out Teller today at teller.io. That's TELLOR.io, or on X at WeAreTeller. Right. Yeah, absolutely. I do want to make sure we have some time to talk about Hats, which is the project you're working on. Last time I had you on the podcast, I think Hats was extremely new. I don't think Hats protocol.xyz was even live yet. I think at the end you said something like, well, in the future, you can go to Hats protocol.xyz, but like not right now. And so obviously, since then, Hats has been live for a very long time. You recently launched Hats Pro. Can you tell us about, I guess, like give us a quick TLDR through the journey of Hats over the last 2+ years, maybe some of the key lessons that you've learned in the process. And then I'd love to hear you talk more about Hats Pro, since most people may not be familiar with that just yet.
Totally. Yeah, it's been an amazing journey. It's coming up on 3 years. We've been working on it, 2 years live on mainnet. So it sort of has this Lindy effect, which we're really excited about. Originally, we were participating in DAOs, and we kept running into the same issues around unclear roles and responsibilities from an org design perspective. And we said, okay, can we solve that? We could do with smart contracts, and that's going to give us some, credible commitments to one another, and it's going to allow us to program these aspects of the organization so that they're automatable and it's cool. So let's start with that. We built a prototype in Raid Guild, and that worked pretty well. And then Spencer was like, I think I've got the architecture for like how to build the real thing. So we worked on the protocol for a while and sort of invented this primitive, which was a perfect way for to create admin relationships with other accounts, where it was delegating specific authorities and responsibilities to them, and then also had a way of holding them accountable by having a DAO vote to remove them. Also had requirements like having a minimum balance of tokens or have to stake in order to get the role. And that was I think we nailed it. And we actually recreated some things like roles-based access control. We learned later is a operating system term in use that computer operating systems for almost 30 years. And a lot of the authorization patterns like OAuth and now continuous authorization, we're sort of like running a parallel universe to them, learning about what's happening in enterprise SaaS, what's happening in security models that people are using for authorization today, and an application that was protocol driven. So we said, okay, we have the protocol. We think we designed the right protocol. We've been using it from Etherscan and from the command line. It works pretty well. Let's build an application that lets us use it more effectively. And also we can use that application to help other DAOs use Hats. So we built what we internally call the Anchor app, but it's app.sprotocol.xyz, shows a tree of all the different roles, their relationships to each other, lets you zoom in on the different authorities that are connected to it and all the smart contracts that are plugged in. And we use that to do like manual services work for like probably 20 to 50 DAOs. And a lot of other people sort of loved what we were doing, jumped into the app and figured out how to use it and built stuff on their own, which was just, at that point, mind blowing that someone was like, yeah, we're going to use this for a DAO. We figured out, check out this tree that we made. Wow, that's amazing. And then, from there we saw, okay, so, we work with Safe DAO, think about what's the right structure with Amy and Entree over there. Work with ZKSync to think about what's the right structure for them, for their organization. Work with EigenLayer. Okay, seeing some emerging patterns. Yeah, this is like such a big, it's a huge lift. It's like 6 weeks of talking to the right stakeholders. And then we do onboarding workshop and map 3 hours. David and have been running these amazing workshops. So they map the organizational structure. What are all the roles, responsibilities, authorities, powers, permissions, accountability structures, compensation? Where does it live? Where should it live? How do we bring that on chain? What parts of it are important to bring on chain? Okay, now we take that output from the workshop and go build it using these amazing primitives. And it's expressible through the protocol very easily. And it's expressible through the application. We can do some custom work. The interfaces to the protocol are sort of like the right shape to be able to do small bits of custom work that are high impact. And we say, okay, well, the most common thing that people are using is organization controlled multisig. So you have a safe, and maybe like ENS had like 5 or maybe now 3 safes that they are part of their core organizational structure. They're sending funds to regularly. They had previously used Metropolis to actually make the connection on chain. And now they don't have that. And so sort of figuring out what's the operational approach that we can use to make this really efficient, to have a great UI around it. Maker famously had 18 multisigs. They're sending $1 million a quarter to each one, approximately. No on-chain relationship at all. So like you've got 5 signers, you trust them, you send $1 million to them, and for 3 months, that money's gone, right? As far as the DAO is concerned, like that's spent. So you hope that they use it effectively and that they have strong reputations. So then thinking about, okay, is there an admin relationship? What does that look like? What's needed to make that effective? Clawing back the funds, the DAO controlling the signers, and maybe adding the ability for the DAO to veto certain transactions over a certain size, constraining the different size amounts with Zodiac roles mod. So Hats Pro, it was are taking all of our learnings from the last 2 years and a bunch of new insights from Cayman foundations and people who are taking a very specific regulatory strategy and condensing that into a Web 2 level UX application that's super easy to use to set up organization controlled multi-sigs with specific signer requirements, make it really easy for the signers to go through the flow of joining that multi-sig. And anyone who needs to live in any jurisdiction in order to be in sort of compliant with their regulatory strategy that they're using, give them the right admin authorities and have the safe sort of live in the right places to just follow the rules that their lawyers did a lot of work to set up. And really for those organizations, I mentioned the barbell earlier, helping the mature DAOs and foundations with that tool and hoping to use that as a launchpad to expand into other authorities and other sorts of configurations that has already enables.
Yeah, and I think all of that is really going to help drive us to that, the year 2034 or whatever we're targeting nowadays with, the flippening happening of DAOs being 100 times better than companies. And I think, one of the biggest areas where DAOs maybe fell behind traditional organizations is with that organizational piece. And Hats really solves that organizational piece a lot for DAOs and kind of gets DAOs, operating in a mature adult professional way that makes it less likely for them to fall apart in the future, and especially as they grow. So it's super, super exciting for me to see.
I think the whole industry is maturing, in part because we found regulatory strategies that work, in part because TradFi is like becoming much more a part of the industry. So certain things have just shifted, and being able to serve those specific needs in sort of the skeuomorphic ways, I think serves as a launch pad to advance toward more and more efficient organizations.
It's interesting you say that because I think a lot of people feel right now that the vibes are a little bit down, and we're in this state of, I think it's just not very clearly defined what state we're in. We're obviously not in a bull market. We're not really in that like typical bear market that we're used to being in either. We're kind of in this like in between limbo state where people have some level of optimism that we're going to come out of it and re-enter a bull market. But at the same time, we haven't exactly seen evidence of that to, really boost that confidence that we're going to get there. And so it's interesting that you're saying that we've really matured in this space when I think at times it feels like, have we made any progress here, over the last few years, or are we still kind of figuring out the same things we've been trying to figure out for all these years?
Yeah, it's super tough. I think we had some key innovations from the last bull market that we haven't seen fully fulfilled yet. And remember, the peak last time was November 2021. So like NFT NYC in October 2021 or whatever it was like that crazed euphoric moment where just the nuttiest stuff was happening. So I still think that we're relatively early. We're seeing a lot of uncertainty across the board with global macro environment and tariffs and all of these types of things. That obviously affects, now that crypto is so deeply tied into traditional finance systems and trading, I think that we're not as much like a hedge against inflation, old narrative type thing that used to be. But in general, like one of the things I always go back to is like L2s, as problematic as L2s have been for Ethereum price by way of creating too much supply for the relative demand of block space, there was a time where DAOs didn't work because the gas fees were too high. So like I remember talking to Dennison at Tally, he said like, well, maybe for like a few months or a year, like no one wanted to vote on a DAO proposal because it was going to cost you 10 grand across all your votes. And there was no paymasters, no good way to for the DAO to cover those costs. I think talking to Sky, who was working on the DXDAO for a long time, it's like we spent like 30 ETH or something on gas fees in one season or something crazy numbers. I was like, okay, yeah. So that's, we haven't gotten to the point where we've actually gotten to do the experimentation with the ideas that were exciting back then with the enabling technologies that exist now. L2s being one of them, obviously Hats being one of them. So I think that there's still room to run, although the macro conditions are still scary. I remain optimistic. The one thing I'll say is that, no one knew that AI was coming in the way that it has. And that has really shifted the focus of like the cutting edge of technological innovation in the world away from crypto and this idea of Web3, like read, write, own, the ownership, the user owned internet or the ownership economy. Like that's not really as exciting to like the relatively small set of innovators in the world in comparison to like people building AI agents and AI based apps. And there's so much room to grow and get, quickly accumulate millions in MRR that way. And I just think we have less attention and less focus than what we once did. But I do still think that we are shifting into a new chapter of the internet. Crypto is obviously a piece of it, and AI is obviously a piece of it. So just figuring out the shape of that market and where the pieces will fit together is pretty interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting that people have kind of been pitting crypto against AI. Like AI is taking all the attention away from crypto when, at least the way I think about it, is like the AI and crypto coming together is like the most powerful thing. And I think there's so much synergy there that I just think it's interesting that people have been seeing it as like crypto versus AI instead of crypto and AI working together.
We have to be aware and a bit vigilant about the narratives that propagate through the space being downstream of trading and also VC investment. So like one great example of this is like people shilling other ones relative to Ethereum. It's like, well, they just funded the seed round of the other L1, but Ethereum is still definitely a better solution. So like, how did that narrative actually propagate? It's really illegible to try to understand the networks of the way that these narratives move through the space. And there's not a lot of transparency around who owns what assets. So I hope that will change, but this led me to be quite skeptical of a lot of the narratives that I hear. I imagine that AI and crypto is pretty similar, where a lot of investment was moving more toward AI. And then the stuff that's getting built at the intersection, they're November, December, Terminal Truce, and then ELIZA and some of the other agent frameworks like ARC, they gained popularity, but then they sort of crashed with meme coins. So weird, there was a period where everyone thought that sentient meme coins, i.e. AI agents that are shilling their own ticker, was going to be like the thing. So it's a very weird time to be alive.
Totally. No, those are really good points. And that's so true. What do you think what do you see as some of the most exciting developments in crypto right now that you think are not getting enough attention?
Yeah, well, really good question. I think Spencer and I were just talking about ZK-TLS earlier, and that's just this sort of bridge between Web 2 and Web 3 that enables is really exciting to me. I still think that there's a lot of underexplored space in terms of reputation systems, as I mentioned earlier. Like Balaji from Network State and Coinbase is now starting to build an on-chain resume primitive and credentialing for people who go through various educational programs or do specific pieces of work. So that's sort of filling in the gap there. Something I feel like has been missing for 3 or 4 years. I think all the like top level DAO governance stuff has evolved to be quite mature and very usable. Aragon's latest release, Agora has been doing great work. And then, like when people were taking a sort of more opinionated approach about like running on-chain operations in more of a company format and using hats in that way, like Decent, for example, and Mezzanine are both sort of like these new world. And actually the Splits team is sort of taking a similar approach as like, the rails are good enough, block space is good enough, fees are good enough that we could just build an entire banking app or an entire payroll app or entire HR application using 100% crypto under the hood. So you get this DeFi mullet aspect. But that I think that there's someone is going to build like the Mercury of crypto for organizations, and that will probably get a lot of additional distribution. I still really like what Farcaster's doing. I think that mini apps of Farcaster are like a really interesting way to get initial distribution, quickly test ideas, and then tap into the social network that has been growing there. Although I think it needs to be a lot bigger in order to make a really, really significant difference. But early signs that that's growing again. Yeah, those are the first things that come to mind.
Yeah, that's a great list of things for people to check out if they're especially people that are feeling a little low right now in the space. I think those definitely head over and check out some of those apps, check out some of those projects, and maybe that'll, get you more optimistic and bullish about the space again. So I want to wrap up with a few questions I have from the community on Twitter and Farcaster. The first one is, and this is a question that we should have led with. It makes me think maybe we didn't, set enough premises for this conversation. But this is from KBC on Farcaster. They said, what could humans do better so that AIs are not needed? So it's kind of challenging the whole premise of this conversation, right? Which is that AIs are the future and AIs can make things better. But they're saying, how did we get here? Like, could we have done something better so that we wouldn't have had to turn to AI to solve our problems?
Yeah, I like that interpretation of the question and sort of answer it tangentially, which is one thing that gave me a lot of relief and I feel like also clarity of where to focus on trying to change the global systems is reading Meditations on Moloch and really understanding the fundamental attractors in our capitalist system that cause a race to the bottom dynamic with negative externalities that affect things like our mental health and our social contracts and the food supply. I would say, like, how did we get here is like, well, the inevitable acceleration of capitalism through to the stage that we're in, and the people sacrificing shared values to gain temporary advantages in the market. And that dynamic is just going to keep playing out. There's nothing that we can do to stop it, except maybe create a really amazing mechanism that helps to distribute resources in a way that we think is better. Also, on how to solve that problem, I look at Hardness from Josh Stark's piece called Institutions, Atoms, and Blockchains as a good reference point. So I don't really believe in malicious actors sort of extracting from the system to be evil villain era stuff. I think it's mostly like systematic concerns of the way that our games are designed, and hopefully we can make better games and scale them up. I don't know if I think that answers a question approximately.
I think so, yeah. And hopefully I'm interpreting that question correctly too, but that was just the first thing that came to mind when I read it. KBC had another question for you on Farcaster as well. They said, normally the AI to human relationship is of a master to servant type. Could this be different in DAOs?
Super interesting question. I think a lot of the original DAO thinkers used to talk about this concept called self-sovereign identity. We sort of have moved away from self-sovereignty because it's not super mimetic, but it's something I care a lot about. And this idea of it sort of interprets freedom in an interesting way. We have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or we have like on our coins, like liberty, a statue of liberty, like America, I think is, or the US, built on the premise of freedom. But of course, we can expand on that in different ways. But I think it's one of the most important aspects of the technology that we're building is it's freedom enabling, being able to participate in permissionless financial systems, no matter what. Is a freedom technology. So I think that by building these types of technologies, and like what we did with Hats, which was we released it open source and we published the first version as a smart contract in Ethereum that's immutable and not owned. So we can say to you that as long as Ethereum exists, it will always be there. That's the type of sort of radical advancement that we can make to respecting the sovereignty of individual actors. And I think that applies to mostly to humans right now, but there are pretty interesting questions that we'll face as we investigate super intelligent models and their relationship to consciousness, embodied models when they go beyond just symbolic interpretations of words that we've given them from the internet. And as we advance scientifically our own understanding of consciousness, we'll have to sort of, as we've looked at animal rights, we'll probably look at AI rights and the types of things we can and can't do, or that the decisions that we make as a stable, unified society about how we collectively want to treat the AIs that we work with. I imagine in my lifetime that's something we'll talk a lot about.
Yeah, I don't know if you watch Severance or not. I feel like most of crypto does. No? Okay. Well, it's, yeah, for those listeners that have watched Severance, or this conversation reminds me of I think it was in the penultimate episode of the season where Audi Mark, sort of disregards the feelings of any Mark as, well, you're not real. Like, I'm the real Mark. Like, I'm the Mark on the outside and you're just my innie. You're just like a fake representation. So you don't have real feelings or needs or desires or anything like that. Like, my life is more important. And any Mark was saying, wait, no, I'm just as real as you are. Like, I have feelings too. I want to find love, and I found love in this world. And by giving that, by giving myself up to Audi Mark, I'm giving all the aspects of myself. And I wonder if AI will get to a point too where they're like, well, I'm not just an AI agent of Diana Chen. I also have my own thoughts and feelings and needs. And, I'm not just purely an embodiment of Diana Chen, but like I'm also my own individual sovereign being as well. That raises a whole slew of other questions too that we don't have time to get into right now. But yeah, that just came to mind. One final question from Twitter. This is from MFL, who was the winner of Crypto the Game Season 1. He said, just as humans need money to live, do you think there is a token that an AI can choose for itself in order to survive? So
yeah, I saw that question when MFL posted it, and he even wanted to challenge the premise that humans need money to live. Like, humans have needs, and we have an economic system that primarily leverages money for earning it and then getting those needs met. But maybe we don't actually need money to live, was my first sort of response. But then I think AI, there's if you break down the stack of like, what are AI's needs? So you need compute, you need access to the internet, you need data, and that data probably gets some sort of liquidity and around its pricing over time in terms of the estimations of how more predictive it will make a given model or how rare it is, right? If you could get the private thoughts of the 10,000 smartest people in the US, probably a really valuable data set. Those, I think, we're on a tokenize everything trend line. That to me is like the EAC of capitalism, is like everything becomes an asset. Every asset has a price. Of course, there's aspects of that that are scary, but I'll skip over that for now. To think that data is priced well and has tokenized versions of it, and that it becomes a commodity and can sort of get buy it and sell it. Obviously, transacting on Ethereum requires Ether for gas fees. So I imagine that at least those four currencies are things that the AI probably cares to accumulate and use.
Yeah, absolutely. And then lastly, I asked you a couple of questions at the end of our last episode. I don't know if you remember or not, but I'm going to throw them to you again. So the first one is, do you still make time to watch the sunset every day?
Yes, pretty much. I did it for the first time. I like to do 30-day challenges for just investigating new facets of life and building new habits. And I did a 30-day challenge over the summer last year to see the sun rise every day. And that was a game changer. Definitely want to try that again. But generally I go to the sunset still every day. And it's a moment for me to reflect and journal, connect with nature, and just like find gratitude and appreciation for my life.
That's awesome that you're still doing it over 2 years later. That's, it's such a good practice to have. And then the other question that I asked you is, to be honest, I can't even remember exactly what I asked you, but your answer included something to the effect of that a lot of the way that you live your life has been dictated by passion and purpose, just, super, super cool and fortunate as well. But you also said that it's come at a cost at times. And you said we could get into it some other time and you could explain sort of what those costs were. And I'm wondering if you'd be happy to explain what some of those costs were that you were talking about.
Interesting, like framing from back then. I'm less afraid now to say I try to live with my soul and with God. And that's like a very personal practice. But I view my life as a process of creating in alignment with these forces. And what I think I was thinking more in terms of like economic costs back then, like to sort of be surrendered to deeper, meaningful life and optimized around that. It feels like there are decisions that come up where I could make more money or I could gain more status, or, play a game that exists that maybe is not as legible to me or maybe I'm bad at. And I generally haven't made those decisions as much as possible because I'm so focused on like my mission and my soul's path. And that to me, I don't think it feels as much of like a cost or a trade-off as it did 2 years ago. And I think maybe a little bit more integrated understanding of how I'm orienting my life and more confidence in like this approach. But I think that's, it's like to live in a society that is playing a certain game, to choose to opt into that game or not is a really important choice in the spectrum of that and the granularity of that. And I think I'm feeling less resistance to my choices in that direction.
That's so cool to hear. I'm really glad that we brought you back on to the podcast. We're able to have some follow-ons to these common through lines that we talked about in the past, and get to hear not just about how Hats is developing or how your thoughts about crypto and AI have developed, but also just how your life philosophy has developed as well. So that's super cool to hear. I'm really happy to hear all of that. Thank you for sharing a little bit of that to wrap us up. So thank you so much, Nick, for joining us again for another episode of Rehash. Hopefully we don't have to wait another 2+ years before we hear from you again, but it's super cool to do these follow-ups with you, see how people have progressed over time. Tell people where they can find you if they want to follow you personally, and also where they can go to check out Hats and to use Hats Pro for themselves.
Well, I'll just say thank you again so much for having me. Thank you, Zaku, for the nomination, the way the whole thing played out. Diana, you are always such an amazing question asker and space holder, so it's really a great pleasure to be here today. You can find me on Twitter, 0xNN2, Farcaster, nintynick.eth, and Hats is hatsprotocol.xyz. We have a blog, we have docs on there at Hats Protocol on Twitter and on Farcaster, and then Pro is at pro.hatsprotocol.xyz. That'll just drop you right into the app. There's a new landing page that will be launching for that pretty soon when we do a more public announcement, but you can DM me if you want to see like our overview slides and what we're sharing with people in our network so far.
Amazing. Thank you so much again for taking the time, Nick. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll be back again next week with another episode of Rehash. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Rehash. Rehash is hosted and produced by me, Diana Chen, and supported by our community of NFT holders who curate our guest lineup each season. To get involved, head over to our website at rehashweb3.xyz and collect this episode as an NFT. Anyone who collects an episode becomes part of the Rehash community and will be able to nominate guests for future seasons. Also, be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at rehashweb3 or on Warpcast and Lens at Rehash, and join our community on Telegram at t.me/rehashweb3 to hash it out with fellow listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again next time.